Once again, it is income tax filing season in America, struggling after a decade of Republican budget cuts that have decimated staff, technology, and operations. The IRS is overwhelmed. Customer service suffers. Enforcement against tax cheating by the wealthy has been hollowed out. There is a huge backlog of returns to work through. I want to emphasize this didn't happen by osmosis. Democrats and Republicans used to agree on the importance of funding the IRS. President Ronald Reagan, for example, nobody's idea of a tax and spend liberal, shared exactly that view. There were more employees at the IRS at the end of Ronald Reagan's term than there were at the beginning. The cuts that have hurt customer service and enforcement against cheats started more than a decade ago. Republicans had an opportunity with the big 2017 tax law to have changed course, corrected these issues, and unfortunately, that was not the case. They could have worked on processing to deal with the backlog, and the country would have been in better shape to deal with the stresses of the pandemic. That was not done. In fact, the budget cuts continued while the tax cut got more complicated. So the result is what you see today. Typical working Americans deal with tax filing nightmares, and wealthy tax cheats get away with rip-offs while they live the dream. I want to tick through several of the effects of these budget cuts. First, on customer service. According to the National Taxpayer Advocate, the IRS received a record 282 million customer service phone calls during the last fiscal year. It was able to answer 11% of them, only 11%. Now, there's actually a cottage industry popping up. Companies charge taxpayers hundreds or even thousands of dollars for the ability to cut the line and get through to the IRS by phone. This is an insult added to injury for the typical American, and it is a direct result of Republican budget cuts that have badly broken a basic government service. Second, on the IRS's aging technology. This committee has spent a long time discussing the decrepit IT used by the IRS. Incredibly, some of that information technology actually goes back decades to the Apollo program. A new report from the Inspector General out last week provided a clear example of how failing technology costs taxpayers money. The IRS gets a lot of mail, and some of it includes physical checks sent by taxpayers. The problem is the machines that scan and sort the mail are just way out of date and unable to properly handle the envelopes that contain checks. This cost the taxpayer more than $56 million in 2021 alone because the IRS was unable to open the right envelopes and then process the payments in time. So, in the long run, failing to invest in technology upgrades doesn't save taxpayer dollars, it costs them. Third, on enforcement, Commissioner Reddick, appointed by Donald Trump, has given the committee a few key facts. One is the amount of taxes owed that go unpaid each year could be as high as $1 trillion. My colleagues on both sides of the aisle, we sat here when Commissioner Reddick said that. In his opinion, we were looking at a tax gap that could be as high as $1 trillion. Another is that the IRS is especially overmatched when it comes to cracking down on partnership schemes. This is one of the go-to tax avoidance loopholes for the wealthiest. Partnership rules got a whole lot more complicated under Donald Trump. The IRS, meanwhile, is unable to audit only a small sliver of the partnership returns that come in. This is in part because there are fewer auditors working today than at any point since World War II. Now, when the tax rules get more complicated and the IRS Enforcement Division shrinks, It's no surprise that high flyers see a green light for cheating. I would just say, colleagues, we've got to work and work aggressively to stop this. Furthermore, at a time when a lot of members are concerned about prices going up for a lot of goods and services, closing the tax gap and making sure the rich pay what they owe is a promising way to cut the deficit and to fight inflation. I'd rather go that route than cut financial support for working families who walk an economic tightrope every day. A couple of points, and then I want to let Senator Crapo give his remarks. Commissioner Rettig made the right call here in the last few days, dropping the plan to require taxpayers to use facial recognition to assess their Internal Revenue Service data. The use of this technology raises serious concerns dealing with privacy and civil liberties, as well as built-in biases that can have a harmful impact on women, Black, and Latino Americans and seniors. My view is when you're talking about digital identity, this is IT infrastructure, it's sensitive, and the government should not be outsourcing. The finance staff and I were in contact with the Internal Revenue Service as soon as it was clear this facial recognition contract was causing problems, and we pushed hard for them to reconsider. The IRS made the right decision. The reality is protecting the Americans' privacy and increasing security are not mutually exclusive. They're not. It's like what Senator Cornyn and I face on intelligence. The reality is smart policies in both of these areas give you more liberty and more security. The same is true with respect to the economy. Not so smart policies give you less of both. Going forward, this isn't just an IRS issue because the same shady contractor and facial recognition technology is used by 9 other agencies. Senator Crapo and I have talked often about this issue of the committee doing more on privacy. I think it is ripe for bipartisan issues. I hope colleagues will want to work together on this going forward. We also want to welcome Erin Collins, a new taxpayer advocate. This is her first hearing with the committee. We always count on the taxpayer advocate. Tough shoes to fill with Nina Olson. I'm telling you that. She's incredible. And so we're glad that the new taxpayer advocate's here. The whole committee looks forward to working with her. We welcome all our guests. Senator Crapo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank all of our witnesses for joining us today. For Ms. Collins, as my chairman has said, this represents her first official appearance before the Finance Committee in her role as the National Taxpayer Advocate, so we welcome you in that capacity as well. Let me divert from my prepared remarks for just a moment to respond to some of the comments of the chairman about the responsibility for this crisis we're seeing in the IRS right now. The entire attack from some on the other side of the aisle saying that the cause of our crisis right now is the failure of Republicans to adequately fund the IRS over the years is, in my opinion, an attempt to try to justify why we see the crisis and to try to justify their desire, which was built into the Build Back Better Act, of an $80 billion influx of revenue to the IRS, which was focused, which, by the way, would have virtually doubled the budget of the IRS over a period of time, and would have been focused almost entirely, not entirely, but almost entirely, on basically funding an army of new auditors to go after the so-called tax gap, claiming that that tax gap was among very, very wealthy individuals who were tax cheats. When you look at the tax gap, which is from data I've received from the IRS, this so-called tax gap, and there is a tax gap, but that tax gap comes largely in the lower and middle income categories from people who are having difficulty figuring out how to deal with the complex IRS code. That's not the entirety of it, but that's where the focus really is, and that's why we were fighting so hard not to have such a heavy-handed response to help those in our society who are having difficulty dealing with the IRS to just face basically an increased enforcement pressure. What we need is assistance from the IRS. And I think that we can find some common ground there if we can work in that context. I should also note, just for a couple of data points, you can make data look like you want it to as you pick your starting points and your ending points for analysis. But over the years, I think that the IRS budget has pretty much kept up with inflation. In the last 4 or 5 years, the IRS budget has been appropriated at 100% of their budget request. This was not a problem that came about because Congress was refusing to give the IRS its requested budgets. It's a problem which the IRS leadership has told us as recently as a day or so ago came about because of the pandemic, which shut down the IRS, just like it shut down much more of the economy, and the ensuing problems that have come because of that, and because of the inability of the IRS to adequately update its IT and be able to actually communicate with taxpayers, which is what I hope that we will be able to discuss significantly today. So let me go on quickly. This committee relies on the Taxpayer Advocate Service for analysis, guidance, and vital assistance for our constituents and for taxpayers across the country. That assistance is especially useful in the current environment. By any measure, the 2022 tax filing season is shaping up to be the most challenging and frustrating in decades, on the heels of challenging 2020 and 2021 filing seasons. In 2021, just over 1 in 10 Americans was ever able to reach the IRS by telephone. More than 250 million calls to the IRS went unanswered in 2021. Those who did manage to get through spent more than 23 minutes on hold, to say nothing of the lengthy waits spent by those who could not get through at all. Also in 2021, the IRS began the tax filing season with a backlog of more than 13 million unprocessed tax returns from the prior season. And it began this year's tax filing season with an even greater backlog of at least 18 million unprocessed tax returns and correspondence. This backlog has grown to over 23 million items today. Currently, millions of Americans need to file their tax returns, despite not having their last year's tax returns even processed. These are by no means the only areas of deep concern. Many Americans await last year's tax refunds. Many Americans await any response to correspondence they sent to the IRS, in many instances months ago. Many Americans have received incorrect or outdated information from the IRS, or have been subject to improper collections or other adverse actions simply because the IRS does not know they have filed a return or responded to a notice. Many Americans cannot receive accurate answers to basic questions like how long will it take to receive their tax refund or an answer to their correspondence. These problems show no sign of abating and appear to be magnifying. Even at this very early stage of the season, significant filing delays already abound and new problems are arising. For example, many taxpayers are struggling to reconcile the stimulus and advanced child tax credit payments they received in 2021 with the applicable tax credits they are allowed, and countless others do not even realize that they are required to do this. Official communications meant to assist taxpayers with these tasks have in many instances only added to the confusion or were simply inaccurate. I appreciate the willingness of the IRS to be open to providing relief to taxpayers affected by the straining circumstances of this tax filing season. But the IRS has the ability to do more, and the taxpayers deserve more. This is the third consecutive filing season impacted by COVID, and it is time for the IRS to demonstrate that it has learned and will grow from the prior two. Despite the many issues plaguing the IRS, I do support the agency's efforts to further its essential mission and salute the sacrifices its employees are currently making to do more. I look forward to the hearing today and hearing the perspective of our witnesses on these issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Crapo. And we would probably go back and forth all morning. And I'm just going to make one comment, and then we're going to put the rest of the figures in the record. I was particularly struck on this argument with respect to service before the pandemic. And in 2019, the Internal Revenue Service employees answered less than a third of the calls to the Internal Revenue Service. So Senator Crapo and I work together on a lot of issues. This is one where we have differences of opinion, but I sure hope we can go back to the old days where, led by Ronald Reagan, there was a lot of bipartisanship because the country needs it. All right, we're ready for our guests. Ms. Collins, the National Taxpayer Advocate. We very much appreciate her. And then we have Ms. Jessica Lucas-Judy, the Director of Strategic Issues at the Governmental Accountability Office. She has been doing good work on those issues for a number of years. And then we have Ms. Jan Lewis, the Chair of the American Institute of CPA Tax Executive Committee. We welcome all of you, and we'll go forward with your comment first, Ms. Collins.
Thank you. Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me today to testify at today's hearing, spotlighting IRS customer service challenges. As I wrote in my recent report to Congress, this past year was the most challenging year taxpayers and tax professionals have ever experienced. Millions of taxpayers are confused. They're frustrated, and they're still waiting for the refunds from the last filing season. Taxpayers who called the IRS toll-free line last year were only able to reach an IRS employee 11% of the time. Thousands of businesses are still waiting to receive the employee retention credit and other benefits that Congress has provided. And although the IRS's Where's My Refund tool received more than 632 million hits, it often was unable to answer the question. A toxic combination of office closures early in the pandemic, inadequate staffing, antiquated IT systems, and the need to divert resources from core work to administer the 3 rounds of stimulus payments, the monthly child tax credit payments, and several financial relief programs has created an unprecedented imbalance between the IRS's workload and their resources. During the past 18 months, the inventory backlog has continued to snowball. We need to put the processing backlog behind us and get the IRS out of the hole it finds itself in and get the IRS to a stable and healthy condition so it can perform its core mission. When I released my annual report last month, I said paper is the IRS's kryptonite and the agency is buried in it. I want to elaborate on that point because paper remains at the heart of the IRS challenges in the processing returns. For context, IRS received almost 170 million individual income tax returns last year. About 90% were filed electronically, and if there were no problems, it was processed quickly and the refund was paid under 21 days. But paper is different. The IRS still transcribes paper line by line, number by number. Last year, the IRS received about 17 million original paper returns, and processing delays have been running up to 10 months. And still we have over 4 million amended returns that taxpayers are waiting to be processed. And when the IRS requires additional information or proposes a change to the taxpayer's liability, it sends the taxpayer a written notice. Most likely, the taxpayer is going to respond in writing, adding to the correspondence backlog. All of these delays contribute to taxpayers' frustration and confusion. The main question I'm sure you and millions of taxpayers are asking is, what can the IRS do now to catch up on its paper backlog? As I see it, we have 2 plausible options. One is to leverage the IRS employees, and 2, use outside vendors to assist with clerical work. The other option is to automate some of its work. For background, there are 2 IRS functions involved in processing a tax return: submission processing and accounts management. Submission processing is the first step in the process. Electronic returns are processed, the paper original returns are transcribed, and paper amended returns are either transcribed or scanned for submission processing. By contrast, the accounts management group consists of what most people think of the customer service representatives. They answer the phone. But they also process original amended returns, and they process the taxpayer correspondence. Recently, the IRS announced it has an inventory surge team. The commissioner is going to assign about 1,200 employees to the account management designed to help process amended returns and correspondence. That was an important first step. The IRS is now establishing a second surge team to put additional resources on the processing challenges. The IRS recently announced a welcome suspension of many of the automated notices while it gets caught up on the backlog. These additional steps should reduce phone calls and eliminate the need for additional correspondence, and more importantly, reduce some of the taxpayers' frustration. And third, the IRS is in the process of outsourcing for staffing to assist in a submission processing function, which again will provide much needed relief. The second viable option is to automate the paper processing through scanning technology with the goal of automating the process so returns can be machine read and avoid the need for manual key and every number. In closing, taxpayer service must improve. And for that to happen, the IRS first needs to eliminate the backlog, pay the delayed refunds, get current on its work, and then return their focus to improving taxpayer service and protecting taxpayer rights. Americans deserve better. Our citizens deserve a responsive and respectful tax administration that serves all taxpayers fairly and timely. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Let's proceed. Go ahead.
Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, members of the committee, I'm pleased to be here today to discuss preliminary observations from GAO's ongoing work at IRS. First, challenges processing tax returns in 2021 that resulted in delays and increased costs. And second, struggles taxpayers faced getting help. Both of these have important implications for the current 2022 filing season that I'll discuss as well. IRS faced an unprecedented workload in 2021 that included delivering COVID-19 relief. IRS also had to manage typical filing season operations during the pandemic. By mid-February of last year, as the filing season began, IRS had a backlog of about 8 million unprocessed returns from 2020. IRS adjusted staffing at processing centers and relied on overtime to handle the returns. By mid-December, IRS had entered all the returns received in 2020 into its processing systems. However, we're again seeing IRS has a return backlog this season. As of the end of 2021, IRS had about 10.5 million returns from that year that had not been fully processed. IRS may need to again rely on overtime to process the backlog and manage incoming returns. The high volume of returns with errors was another challenge. From January to November, our preliminary work indicates IRS suspended about 35 million returns due to errors. Now, that's a big increase, about 86% more than in prior years. These errors required manual review and correction, which led to refund delays for millions of taxpayers. Delays cause hardship for taxpayers and can also cost the government money. In the last 7 years, IRS has paid almost $14 billion in interest on refunds. In our ongoing work, we're analyzing data on refund interest payments and exploring factors that contributed to that increase. Turning now to customer service, IRS answered more calls during the 2021 filing season than the last 4 filing seasons, but an unprecedented increase in calls resulted in a low level of customer service overall. From January until the end of the filing season in May, calls increased about 400% from 2019. IRS said it did not have enough staff to meet the demand. It hired 3,800 customer service staff by the end of the filing season, but they needed training and they were unable to answer calls during the busiest time. In part to help manage the call volumes, IRS directed taxpayers to use its online application, Where's My Refund, to get most up-to-date information. But our ongoing review indicates Where's My Refund provides limited information and user satisfaction declined. IRS recognizes Where's My Refund has limitations, but does not have plans to modernize it. We know that IRS has significant long-term efforts underway to upgrade its IT infrastructure, and modernizing Where's My Refund will take planning and resources. So we're continuing to explore these challenges in our ongoing work. IRS's correspondence inventory also increased. Our preliminary analysis indicates as of the end of the 2021 filing season, it was nearly 3 times the average inventory from prior years. Further, almost half of that was overage. IRS's different customer service options are interdependent, often sharing the same staff. IRS struggles to balance competing demands for telephone and written correspondence because many staff are responsible for both duties. Further, when taxpayers cannot find the information that they need using online resources, they call or they send mail. To help address immediate needs, IRS converted seasonal workers to permanent hires, rehired former staff, and used a streamlined hiring approach. Our ongoing review, however, indicates IRS encountered challenges hiring enough new returns processing staff during fiscal year 2021. Attrition further affected staffing, with the attrition rate for returns processing staff more than twice the agency's overall rate. We recognize overtime is a necessary tool to help manage unexpected surges in workload, but it's not sustainable to rely primarily on overtime to offset complex human capital challenges such as reduced staffing levels and attrition. IRS's use of overtime may also indicate a larger need for a strategic workforce plan that addresses mission-critical skills gaps. In 2019, we recommended IRS establish such a plan. IRS agreed, but the effort to implement that has been delayed. In conclusion, ongoing challenges precipitated by the pandemic and new responsibilities to provide relief to Americans adversely affected IRS's return processing and customer service. Amid these challenges, IRS issued economic impact payments and answered more calls than prior years. Nevertheless, new and persistent challenges that IRS faced pose risks for the 2022 filing season. Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, members of the committee, this concludes my prepared remarks, and I look forward to any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lucas-Judy. Ms. Lewis, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the committee. My name is Jan Lewis, and I'm chair of the AICPA's Tax Executive Committee and a CPA and a partner at Haddocks Reed Eubank Betts in Jackson, Mississippi. On behalf of the AICPA, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to testify. However, I really shouldn't be here today. It's tax season, and I should be at home in Mississippi helping my clients. But I'm here today because there's still time to salvage this filing season, or at least make a difference. Over the past several years, we've experienced a variety of service issues with the IRS, most of which relate to erroneous notices, slow processing of returns and written correspondence, and difficulty in reaching the IRS by telephone. These problems have been magnified the past 2 years, and at times we as CPAs feel powerless to help our clients navigate these IRS service issues. For example, my clients are getting notices to file forms and returns that they've already filed. Several clients received notices stating that the IRS needs more time to resolve an issue, but there's no record of an original notice ever being received. We've had clients receive notices regarding payroll form 941 stating that the IRS needs more time, but the client has no employees and does not even file payroll tax returns. Clients are still waiting for refunds from forms 941 and 941X filed to claim the employee retention credit for 2020 and 21. I could go on for hours with examples, but let me just give you one more that's particularly frustrating. Several pass-through entities were not able to file their 2019 returns before the extended due date in 2020 because of various issues related to the pandemic. All were only 1 or 2 months late, but despite the IRS's indication that there would be penalty relief for late filings due to COVID, the telephone assisters had no knowledge of any special pandemic relief when we called. Taxpayers and practitioners understood that the IRS would offer leniency, but that simply did not happen, and penalties were assessed. This isn't just about my own personal experiences. We're hearing every day from CPAs who are having the same type of problems. When the pandemic hit in 2020, we know the IRS did have to shutter campuses and offices. They did have to learn a new and safer way to do business. Relief legislation did bring additional work for the IRS, and questions and confusions brought the unprecedented call volume from taxpayers and their advisors. But the past 2 years have been like none of us could have imagined. Frankly, though, we expected a little more flexibility and a little more empathy from IRS leadership. As the work piled up beyond historic proportions, the AICPA continued to give suggestions to reduce some of that work. Let me be clear, our suggestions won't fundamentally fix the problems, although in my written testimony I do outline some strategic long-term recommendations that may help. But for almost 2 years, we have offered suggestions how to slow down the work coming in, particularly the paper, so that the IRS can have a better chance to catch up. We started on our own, and this year we found 12 other willing partners to form the Tax Practitioners United for Taxpayer Relief Coalition, which easily came together to help mitigate the burden on taxpayers and practitioners. So here are our suggestions. All of these are steps the IRS can implement now on its own. Temporarily postpone all automated compliance actions. Adjust account hold times. Liberalize the reasonable cause penalty waiver process. and provide taxpayers with targeted relief from both the underpayment of estimated tax and late payment penalties. We'd like to acknowledge the recent steps taken by the IRS in reaction to this growing expression of concern, including the suspension of some notices and letters. However, we must urge the service to move as quickly as possible to offer all available reasonable measures of relief. We are already in the throes of filing season. Time is of the essence. Before I conclude, I'd like to bring up one other item. IRS's insistence on the implementation of the reporting on Schedules K2 and K3 for this filing season without the ability for those forms to even be e-filed before the due date of the returns. Additional IRS changes to the instructions for these forms mid-filing season added even more confusion to the issue. So although we do appreciate the recent IRS statement regarding transition relief, given the already unprecedented processing backlogs, the AICPA has deep concerns that implementing these new requirements will ultimately exacerbate the challenges everyone in the tax administration community already is facing, and it conflicts with the intended goals of Schedule K2 and K3. We therefore recommend the IRS delay the implementation of these Schedules K2 and K3. Thank you again so much for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thanks to all three of you. And you can only imagine the typical taxpayer sitting out there, gnashing their teeth, listening to all of these tortured exercises through a kind of bureaucratic never land. And I want to see if I can ask a question that might provide a path for really going forward and that we could both work on, Democrats and Republicans together. So you all have made a very convincing case that the information technology at the IRS is from the dark ages. So we have Ms. Collins saying, for example, the IRS has at least 60 different computer systems that can't talk to each other. That's a kind of a showstopper. Clearly, that ripples through to customer service, which is why I mentioned, all these people listening to all this who can't get through. And I'm going to give you an example. Right now, if you call the IRS about your refund, the person who answers the phone may not have access to the information that the caller needs. If I check the IRS's Where's My Refund tool, it can't talk to other systems to find out what I need to do to get my refund. And I can't send the IRS an email. So I've got to write the IRS or make another call, adding to the backlog of things that the IRS has to process manually. So that is why I described this kind of intersection out there in the bureaucratic never-land that the typical taxpayer, faces of outdated technology and the service problems. So my question to all of you, and I noted the last thoughtful comments by Ms. Lewis about, actually getting these upgrades done and doing it quickly. It just seems to me that you have a fundamental challenge of how you get the IRS to make major upgrades to 60 different computer systems while they're running the filing season and probably not even knowing how much money has got to be spent on upgrades to really get at the problem. Let's just get each one of you involved. What's the challenge here to getting a permanent fix? A permanent fix. We'll start with you, Ms. Collins. We'll just go down the road. What's the path to getting a permanent fix so we can upgrade the technology for the long term rather than just putting Band-Aids on it and that way improve customer service? Ms. Collins.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head by describing the standalone systems that the IRS has is they don't talk to each other. So it's very difficult for an IRS employee to assist either an IRS employee or the taxpayer without getting all of these systems integrated. So in essence, the IRS, we need to get out of the age of the dinosaur or the dark ages, as you indicated, and we need to modernize our systems. We need to, in essence, the entire infrastructure that it was built upon, which was at least 40, 50, 60 years old, we need to correct that, and then the systems can work in concert with each other. But it's our underlying systems that have been around for a long period of time that need to be upgraded so we can modernize the entire system.
Does anybody have a plan to do this? Because I constantly hear about the status quo, which is why I describe, taxpayers listening to all this, just gnashing their teeth. But you don't hear as much about a game plan or a strategy for getting beyond the Band-Aid placement program.
Yeah, the challenge in my discussions with the IRS is it's really, they look at it as a funding issue. This is a heavy lift for the IRS. They need to have sustained long-term funding in order to take on a project that size. Congress, with respect to the monthly payments, provided resources. They were able to come in and do that, and they did it in a very short period of time. But again, it's another standalone system. We need to start with the foundation and work our way up. So if you were to ask the IRS, they do have a plan, but unfortunately it involves long-term funds.
We're going to ask them at the next hearing, I think. Okay. Ms. Lucas-Judy, your thoughts?
I would just add that GAO is currently reviewing IRS's plans for modernizing its systems, including the individual master file and others. But, sort of overall, IT management and acquisitions is a high-risk issue across the government, and it's important for IRS to have an inventory to know what it currently has, to know, prioritize how it's going to address the different systems, know what that's going to cost, have a schedule, and then have a plan in place to be able to monitor and report to Congress and others on its progress.
Ms. Lewis, your comments really were a big factor in my asking the question the way I did, because I do see this intersection between outdated technology and customer service problems. What's your thoughts about getting beyond just slapping Band-Aids on things?
Well, Senator Wyden, I appreciate your comments, and while as a practitioner, it's not my role to budget for the IT at the IRS. But we know that technology and staffing and budget is critical for the IRS, and we have steadfastly supported that as long as there's a balance between enforcement efforts, IT efforts, and customer service. The specific comment that I made about the Schedule K2 and K3 not being able to be e-filed is a particular issue with practitioners. This is a schedule that has come out for pass-through entities. In 2020, we knew it was going to come out. We knew it wouldn't be required, but it is still not able to be included in an e-filed return and will not be until at least late March for partnerships.
I'm just going to keep the record open so that for those of you who would like to put some thoughts on paper with respect to what I think is almost the existential question for reform, is how do you do the big upgrade that you need while still giving people, better service, and you put it down on paper so the Democrats and Republicans, like, as I mentioned, was done with Ronald Reagan, get serious about fixing this. Senator Crapo.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to follow up on Senator Wyden's questions. This shows that we can find an intersection where we can find some serious agreement on a bipartisan basis. And so I'm going to follow up just to try to noodle out a little bit more information about this exact question. And Ms. Collins, I really found interesting your comment about paper being the kryptonite for the IRS. As Americans who listened to your testimony heard you say that and describe it, and then heard the rest of the testimony of our panelists, it must have been mind-blowing to them to believe that that's the way it is with the IRS in terms of their IT infrastructure and technology. And it seems to me that this is something that we really do need to solve. I've asked the IRS, and we'll continue asking them, as Senator Wyden said in our next hearing. We're going to on this issue. I expect that we'll have a chance to ask them here. What is their plan, and what is it going to cost? How do we need to fund it to get this issue solved? Just a couple of more data points. As you know, in fiscal year 2021, the IRS was given a special $1 billion allocation for IT modernization, which represents about 3 to 4 times its annual IT modernization appropriation request. But we don't know whether that was enough or whether it was just a drop in the bucket or how we need to deal with it. Currently, the IRS has actually only spent or committed about $160 million of that appropriation, around 16%. If you go on, from fiscal year 2018 through 2021, on average, only 1.44% of the IRS's appropriated funding has been allocated to modernization, as compared to nearly 42% for enforcement and 35% for operations support, which includes trying to stand up and maintain the existing outdated infrastructure. As you know, the IRS gets around 10% of its operating budget from non-appropriated funds, such as user fees, and it entirely controls how these fees are spent. Are these being allocated to modernization, or are they being allocated to some other function? So my question, which I'd really like each of you to respond to briefly, we got about 2.5 minutes for you to finish your responses here, is just, can you put a little more detail on this? Do we have any notion? Ms. Lucas-Judy, you indicated that you're reviewing their plan, which means they must have a plan. Is there any notion as to whether the plan is sufficiently detailed that we could know how much it's going to cost? What do we need to do in terms of making that funding support available for the IRS to get this issue fixed? Could we just, again, go down the line, Ms. Collins?
Yeah, my understanding as well is that they do have a plan. I believe they have a price tag associated with the plan. I think their concern is it is a very large dollar, that they cannot start it without multi-year funding. And so it's sort of, you start and stop a project this size. And so what they have been doing, unfortunately, a large percentage of their operation or their budget goes to what I call putting the Band-Aids on the 60 legacy systems. We need to decommission those systems and, again, start from the foundation and work their way up. Again, my understanding is they don't feel they have the funding sufficient for multi-year to do the foundation. So, again, we're working on the Band-Aids to keep the system running.
Do you have any idea what that funding amount is? I mean, can you even give us a ballpark idea?
I do not. We can always supplement it and get that information for you.
All right, I'd appreciate that. Ms. Judy?
Likewise, I think also, as I said, we are looking at the plan. It was delayed somewhat in part from the pandemic and the same supply chain issues that others have been dealing with. But really, the multi-year funding, I think, was one piece of it. Also, just making sure that it's sufficiently coordinated with all the different parts of IRS and the different stakeholders to make sure that the priorities are set among the different systems.
Thank you. And Ms. Lewis?
I will defer to the GAO and the taxpayer advocate and look forward to working with this.
All right, one quick question that any of you could answer. If you know the answer, it would seem to me that if we can get going on this plan and we can get down the road on coordinating, getting rid of the kryptonite, that we would save tremendous amounts of money in the IRS budget that is now being used to deal with kryptonite. Am I seeing that wrong?
No, I think not only do I agree, but if you ask the IRS, I think they would wholeheartedly agree to that as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Crapo. Senator Cantwell.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you to the ranking member. I join my Northwest colleagues in technology update. We say this because we saw what happened last year with our constituents trying to get answers. And so what was it, 1 in 9 actually were able to get through to the IRS as far as calls. So we believe that focus, and if you've talked to your accountant this tax season, you can see the complexity in the letters they're sending out. If you have an accountant, and if you don't have an accountant, the complexity is amazing. So there's lots to discuss, and people need answers. So one issue, the IRS is piloting its use of online chat features, but right now it's limiting it to resolving collection notices. It's not been expanded to allow taxpayers to chat with customer service representatives about tax questions. In 2019, GAO study compared the IRS online communication capabilities with other nations and found that taxpayers in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand were able to securely chat online with tax agencies to get answers to their questions. So we need, I think California and Alabama also have revenue agencies that offer similar chat functionality. So as we look at increasing the funding for the IRS to invest in the agency's technology workforce, what Ms. Lucas-Judy is part of that GAO study, you know, are you guys resisting this? What is the review of this process? What can we do to get this online communication support system in place for our constituents?
One of the challenges there was in security, trying to make sure that the function is sufficiently secure to be able to protect sensitive taxpayer information. We know that, as you mentioned, there are other places that have been able to put such a function in place. That's something that the IRS has been looking at and testing, and we're continuing to follow up with them. One of our recommendations to them from that report was that they better integrate taxpayer needs, making sure they're putting functions out there and systems out there and prioritizing things that taxpayers actually want and will use, not just things that are sort of, you know, easy to do. And
But
so
you're
that's
saying
part of
that
it.
you use it for online chat for collection. The IRS uses it. Do I have that right?
Right.
Okay, so you're using it to talk to taxpayers about sensitive tax information, like, please, you know, pay your bill. Okay, but you don't want to use it to allow them to communicate to you about, listen, how do I do this and this and this?
That is something that GAO's heard that IRS is working on expanding, and as part of its taxpayer experience strategy, it is one of the functions that they're trying to expand.
Are you supportive of that?
We're supportive of anything that can protect taxpayer information but provide better customer service.
Okay, I'm just confused, because do you think that there's not taxpayer information being discussed when you call them in an online chat for collection?
I have not reviewed that, so I'm not sure. I mean, I would assume that there is.
I just think that we have to think about where our constituents are. And so if you're using one technology to basically call them and use that as a communication tool, but then they have questions and they want to talk to you saying, we don't know whether it's secure. So I think the issue is that countries around the globe are using it because it is secure. Maybe, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, we need to look at how to upgrade the security technology.
Sounds too logical.
Of the IRS. And I'm not saying that there aren't real security issues, for sure, but at the same time, I think this 1 in 9 calls being answered during tax season is just not acceptable, and we have to figure out. We talked, obviously, with our own little IRS commissioner about the surge capacity the IRS uses, but that's not enough. We got to get into the 21st century here with this level of communication. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Folks, when Senator Cantwell talks technology, everybody listens up. Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The witnesses today have painted a pretty dire picture of the IRS, and we appreciate you bringing to us some of your suggested solutions. I, for one, am skeptical that technology and money, which seem to be the answer to a lot of our problems these days, is going to be the panacea that's going to solve the problem. Maybe that's part of the answer. But actually, as bad as the IRS's record is, I would like to tell you that this is only part of the story. It's actually worse. For example, in fiscal year 2020, the Office of Management and Budget determined that the Earned Income Tax Credit, the additional child tax credit, are susceptible to improper payments. Matter of fact, according to the most recent reports, the IRS paid out in just one fiscal year $22.8 billion in improper payments. That's money that taxpayer dollars that went to a person who was not legally entitled to that money. And I believe the Taxpayer Advocate has listed this as one of their top concerns. So not only is the IRS not responding to customer inquiries and processing IRS returns for people, for their customers, they're actually writing checks to people who are not entitled to that. I noticed that the administration's budget request for 2022 was $13.2 billion. And so the amount of improper payments that went out in 2020 was more than double the entire budget for the IRS. And I would note that if the administration thought that more money was the solution, they made a budgetary request for 10.4% increase over the previous year. But unfortunately, as you know, we've been operating on continuing resolutions and haven't even passed an appropriation bill, a single appropriation bill this year, which is a serious problem. I would like to ask Ms. Lucas-Judy, on top of the ordinary problems that the IRS has dealing with the tax code, in 2021, Congress passed a number of additional tax legislative changes, including enacting a new temporary advance paid tax credit, further stimulus payments, and a retroactive change in certain tax benefits of unemployment benefits. I'm worried that we are not making the IRS's job any easier. We're just making it more and more difficult by passing that sort of legislation without actually considering what impact it would have on the IRS's ability to administer these changes. Can you help us better understand how each of these changes had repercussions for the filing season, and give us a sense of what this says about the tax legislative changes that Congress makes?
Certainly. Any changes that are made to the tax code or to IRS's responsibilities during an existing filing season or right before the filing season begins do cause challenges for IRS, because then it has to redirect resources into putting systems and processes in place, to be able to make payments such as the advanced child tax credit payments. It also causes confusion for taxpayers. Because then, if rules are changing, they have to wait for IRS to get guidance out. Some people had already filed their taxes in 2021 when changes retroactively to taxation of unemployment benefits happened, and IRS scrambled to figure out a way to be able to process those returns and get people refunds if they needed them without folks having to file an amended return and add to the backlog that IRS already was facing. So anything that can be done as far as making changes perhaps farther in advance of the filing season would be helpful to taxpayers.
So it sounds to me like Congress, instead of making the IRS's job easier, is actually making it more complicated and making it worse. I think there are three questions that need to be answered to determine if the IRS is meeting its stated mission. One, did taxpayers find that filing their tax return was easier than the previous year? Secondly, were taxpayers' questions and problems handled as smoothly as account inquiries from their bank, their credit card company, or a utility? And did the IRS treat taxpayers respectfully and professionally? I know my time is running out, but let me just ask all of you, if I can, if you had one priority, one recommendation that you could make, and only one, what would it be to fix this mess?
Having a robust online account for not only individuals, but for practitioners to access taxpayer records would make a huge difference. And I think the whole pandemic, we realized telephones are a real challenge. And as you alluded to, this is not the same service you can get from your bank. We need to expand. We need to include chatting with an IRS agent, uploading documents, downloading documents. So my vision from the day I joined is we really need to get this and get it moving. And I would put that as a #1 priority for improving taxpayer experience.
I'm going to cheat a little bit and add to that and just say that the more things that we can do to encourage electronic filing, provide electronic processing of forms, this makes the system faster and cuts down on mistakes, both on the taxpayer's side and on IRS's side, would help significantly.
I'll echo Ms. Collins' comments about having a tax practitioner's special third-party office with the IRS. I do think practitioners would welcome that. We have actually asked for that in the past. I do want to just circle back around. I apologize for being a broken record, but we are talking about customer service challenges right now, and we've heard about the backlog. So if I had a immediate solution, we have some concrete solutions, but we've got to stop the notice process, the automated notices from continuing to come out, because that is what's impacting taxpayers right now. And it's right now that we are worried about.
I thank my colleague. I just want to take a quick minute because my colleague raised a number of important issues, and we're going to do everything we can, and Senator Crapo and I have been talking about, to see if we can engineer a bipartisan effort here. This is so important. They're talking about these systems that are still apparently using Apollo technology and the like. I just want to make one point. My colleague from Texas said, oh, big problem is earned income tax credit, child tax, fraud. I'm against fraud everywhere. But the evidence is that's not where the big money is. That's not where the heart of the problem is. With those people who are walking an economic tightrope, they spend the money they get on basic services, food and shoes and the like. But the fact is, today, wealthy tax cheats in a big partnership are more likely to get hit by a meteor than they are to be audited. And so we really have to find a way to bring some basic fairness into this. And it certainly starts at the top. So we'll continue this discussion, and I'm going to do everything I can to find common ground with colleagues. Senator Cardin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I've been listening to the exchange. And I really do think this committee has an extremely important role to play here. I am proud of our chair and ranking member working together. And I understand the exchanges that took place a little bit earlier. But I think it's critically important that this committee protect the integrity of the IRS and give it the resources it needs in order to carry out its important mission. We know there will be members on both sides of the aisle that will beat up on the IRS. That's just what happens. We have to make sure that it gets the support it needs to carry out its mission. And I appreciate all three of our witnesses being here. Ms. Lewis, I know it's tax season. I heard your comments. Thank you for being here because we appreciate that very much. The IT issues are incredibly challenging. And yes, we need to have a plan from the IRS. We need to review that plan. We have to recognize the investments that are going to be necessary to do that. But then Congress needs to act and give them the long-term commitment of resources in order to implement the IT modernization. And we've only been talking about this now for about 30 years. So this is not a new subject for our committee. But we have to make that commitment to upgrade the IRS's technology because the paper explosion, we have a responsibility to deal with that. In regards to the personnel, look, the numbers speak for themselves, as the chairman pointed out. The number of IRS employees today is what it was 20 or 30 years ago, and the volume has increased by such a dramatic amount. They need the numbers, they need the training support. I want to go on, first of all, I want to compliment the very talented people, the line workers at the IRS that are doing incredible service under extremely challenging circumstances, and I thank them for their willingness to stick by their posts and help us deal with this issue. I want to deal, in my time, if I might, with two issues. So let me start first with my responsibilities as chair of the Small Business Committee. I think we have not paid enough attention to small business owners. Small business owners are burdened by the individual tax issues. They're not using the C rate. So I would welcome, Ms. Collins, if you have some thoughts as to how we can be more user-friendly to small businesses, particularly the really small ones, the mom and pops, as to how we can help them in perhaps policy changes or changes within the IRS to be more friendly towards those small business owners who don't have the capacity to have the accounting services either in-house or by contract in order to deal with the tax challenges.
Yeah, I think small businesses, as you pointed out, and COVID has hit them really hard these last 2 years. So I think as we all acknowledge, the tax code is anything but simple. And trying to comply and do the right thing is a very difficult process. A lot of small businesses, as you pointed out, don't have the funds to hire a CPA or accountant. They do try and do the best they can. So I think the IRS is trying to reach out, doing a lot of outreach for small business. We really need to help educate them, bring them into the fold, and explain to them what needs to be done. So I think we really need to look at some of the under-resourced communities and help those businesses out.
Thank you. I don't know, Ms. Lucas-Judy, if you have a comment on that, welcome your thoughts.
Likewise, I think we're looking at outreach and how IRS has been reaching out to small businesses with regard to COVID relief, the different provisions that are there for them, and to see the extent to which they're able to take advantage of that. So anything that IRS can do to improve customer service there.
And Ms. Lewis, what I really appreciate from you is that the 2019 tax bill did very little, 17 tax bill, did very little to help small companies. Pass-through issues have certainly not been helpful to a lot of my constituents. Can you just share with us your thoughts as to we could do a more effective job in the tax code as far as policy to help small companies that use the individual tax rates?
Thank you. And Senator, this is really an issue that I'm passionate about. These are what my clients do. They are small businesses. I grew up as the daughter of an independent pharmacist who had his own store, and I watched him every day come home after working till 6 o'clock to do the sales tax returns and the payroll tax returns and all of the compliance activities. And that's what I do for my clients right now. It is burdensome. It is complex. But we're here to help in any way that we can. And I would appreciate any technology updates as well. But again, I'm going to go back to my point. What's burdening my small businesses right now is the unending notices and not being able to reach the IRS.
Appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, just one additional comment, and that is on the paid preparers. As we know, the IRS lost that authority. We have not been able to come together to correct that. I know the chairman's been very interested in it. Ms. Collins, can you just give us your thoughts as to the need for the IRS to have the authority to deal with paid preparers?
Yeah, my office has been a very big advocate. And I think, unfortunately, what we see, we have a lot of taxpayers come in who have been the victim of individuals who are not qualified to prepare returns. And that is something that I think across the country we need to stop. Some folks may be well-intentioned and they get it wrong, but I think there are other folks that actually are taking advantage of taxpayers. And we think by regulating it and providing some standards, hopefully that would weed out some of those bad actors.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think my colleague and his expertise on these small business issues is going to be absolutely crucial as we wend our way to some really permanent reforms. I think Senator Cassidy, our colleague from Louisiana, is online and ready to ask some questions. Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Ms. Lewis, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to give a little bit of context on this. And I am channeling my CPAs back home, and you can understand why this is so important to them. Hurricane Ida hit Louisiana, and many found themselves without power. In fact, I went down to one place, total devastation, and the wife of the fellow doing the emergency management was most concerned about getting her tax forms in timely. And so even people who are punctilious, nonetheless, are having problems. And so I'm told that in response to the disaster, the IRS extended filing deadlines for businesses and individuals in Louisiana, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut till February 15th. And I appreciate that. But I'm also told, according to my accountants, that after November the 15th, returns had to be filed as paper returns because software vendors and the government shut off the system to prepare for the upcoming filing season. So my concern, all these folks filing by paper are going to have their returns stuck with millions of other delayed terms. And with only 11% of the phone calls being answered, that they won't be able to get through. So Ms. Lewis, just from your experience, how do the delays at the IRS impact those businesses, individuals taking advantage of a disaster tax relief? And what can the IRS do to provide relief in the situation such as I described?
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. I know this firsthand, not only because I'm from Mississippi, next to your state, and we do deal with disaster relief, but we specifically dealt with Hurricane Ida concerns. And in my case, I actually had to stop my preparation for this hearing so that I could finish those last returns that were due February 15th. I think the issue was the original extension date was January the 3rd, which made sense according to some 90-day timeline after the hurricane. But in that January timeframe, I had clients that were ready to file. And we had these conversations about, should I go ahead and file and paper file? How long will it take to get my refund? Or should I wait until IRS filing season opens up on January 24th and then file my return? It will be late, but at least it will be e-filed. It was a real struggle for us talking to taxpayers about that. Fortunately, they did come back and give us till February 15th, and I think in large part because that way we could e-file these returns. That was a tremendous help. But we continually to have issues with disaster, and we do have, we've supported the Disaster Retirement Savings Act and other disaster relief, and AICPA stands ready to help in any way on disaster relief because we do need that as permanent.
Well, kind of related to that, and I'll follow up with you and perhaps also a question for Ms. Collins. I'm told that there's a system, an internal system known as an O-freeze. The IRS is supposed to flag the zip codes affected by disasters so those eligible to receive relief do, but that there's some measure of errors associated with this. Now, again, these are my accountants, and accountants are paid to be anxious for their clients' welfare. Because I ask, how often is sometimes? But I didn't really get an answer on that. But I can't imagine that failure to flag these zip codes correctly is going to cause potentially lots of complications for the taxpayers, penalty notices, et cetera. Has this been a problem in your experience? And then I'd like to ask Ms. Collins, what can the IRS do to reduce errors like failure to put in the O-freeze information correctly?
I'll let Ms. Collins speak. I was just going to speak as a practitioner. We have in the past had difficulties with hurricane or any kind of disaster relief that should be allowed to our taxpayers in our zip codes, but it somehow was not indicated by the IRS.
Can I ask how big of a problem that was, Ms. Lewis? Was that a major problem or just an occasional inconvenience?
I will tell you, we haven't experienced for Hurricane Ida yet because we've just filed those returns. I'm very nervous because the current system with the backlog and the correspondence is much worse now when we had it with Katrina or with some of the other hurricanes at that time. It was not a huge issue, but we were able to reach the IRS then.
I see, but the fact that phone calls are only 11% being returned now could compound. Ms. Collins, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, our office monitors those, and what we did find was if you had overlapping disasters, that's where the challenge was with the IRS having the incorrect coding. They have gone back and changed that programming, so hopefully on a go-forward basis, that's not an issue. We also were very strong in pushing the IRS to move that January date because, again, we don't want paper returns if it's at all possible. So one of the recommendations we made in our annual report is going forward for the IRS, instead of just having a 90-day window, look to see the filing dates. Do we have the ability to electronically file? And that should be the extended due date. Do not move the extended due date to a situation where they'd have to file a paper return.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield.
Thank my colleague, Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first, before I make the other remarks I'm about to, acknowledge the hardworking employees of the IRS, many of whom have been working tirelessly since the pandemic began almost 2 years ago next month. And we certainly want to thank them for their dedication to America's taxpayers. But throughout 2021, during the 2022 tax filing season, tens of millions of taxpayers have been forced to wait extraordinarily long periods of time for the IRS to perform the most basic of functions, processing their returns, issuing their refunds, and addressing their correspondence. That's why my office has continued to receive calls about these issues each and every day. We've had thousands of calls since the pandemic began. The IRS touches more Americans than any other entity, public or private. We have to have an IRS that works. That's why I've led or co-led 6 letters in the last 5 months, including the most recent one, 210 bipartisan, bicameral members of Congress, encouraging the IRS to work down its unprecedented backlog and improve its customer service. Now, Ms. Lewis, I worked with the AICPA to send 2 letters to the IRS last month asking for the IRS to halt automatic collections, delay the collection process for filers, streamline the penalty relief process for taxpayers who have been impacted by COVID-19, provide penalty relief for taxpayers who have paid at least 70% of their taxes that were due for the 2020-2021 tax years, expedite the processing of amended returns, provide the National Taxpayer Advocate staff and congressional caseworkers with timely responses, pursue maximum overtime options for IRS staff who are working on processing the backlog of returns, allow additional employees to volunteer to join surge teams to work down the backlog, and to extend overtime options for additional surge team employees. So my question to you, is the IRS listening to any of these requests? What changes has the IRS made in response to these requests?
Thank you, Senator Menendez. I also want to echo your comments about IRS employees. We do appreciate that they have worked tirelessly throughout this process. We need a modern, functioning IRS. The AICPA works best. Taxpayers work best when we have an IRS that works. Also want to especially thank you for keeping these issues in the forefront. This hearing today is important, and that the letters that are going out are important. The IRS has responded, probably in a large part because of the heat that has been raised the last few weeks. So thank you for that. What they have responded is a partial response. They've one notice turned into several notices. There are still several other notices that we would like to see halted that are not on the list. They have done the notice part. They have not extended the hold times. They have not helped us with the penalty relief that we desperately need and that taxpayers desperately need. So, yes, there are more things to do. They are responding. We just wish they had responded sooner.
What you just mentioned, are those some of the notices yet to be issued that you believe should be issued?
Yes. Well, notices that have already been issued, if the automated compliance actions stop, then hopefully the taxpayers won't continue to follow up issues while those are being worked. The concern is there are a few notices like levying Social Security benefits. That's an IRS notice that goes out if there's a collection issue and that's not on the list. So if they're still working on the backlog and there's a balance out there, someone's Social Security benefits could be levied. So there are a few like that and some matching notices that we would like to see added to that list. Again, anything that can help them work through the backlog.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me turn to Ms. Collins. There was a Washington Post article published yesterday, 8 scary IRS notices that are being suspended for now, where you alerted the public to a very important issue. Specifically, you stated that, quote, if taxpayers believe they owe some or all of the tax, they should determine what they can pay, make that payment, stop the running of the interest, and continue to work with the IRS to resolve this issue. How would you suggest that taxpayers best work with the IRS to make those payments or resolve those issues? What's the most painless way for taxpayers to do this?
Yeah, as you pointed out, I think that is one thing I want to make sure that taxpayers do not misunderstand. The suspension of the notice does not mean that interest is suspended. So until the payment is made, the interest continues to accrue. So taxpayers can work with the IRS, and we all are noticing and talking about the IRS's poor level of service on the phones. But on collection issues, you actually can do multiple things. You can go online and do an installment agreement. If it's under $50,000, it's a very quick process to do. You can also do it through, they have chat bots, so you can do it through a bot as well on the phone. You can reach out to the IRS and do what we call as an offer and compromise. If you can show that you have financial challenges, you may be able to reduce the liability and settle it with finality to put the tax behind you so you can move forward. And they also have something that's called currently not collectible, which if you can establish your financial concerns, they will in essence back off collections for a period of time, giving the taxpayer an opportunity to get in a better financial, healthy state. So the IRS is willing to work with you. But again, my concern is I was a big proponent to shutting down the notices and suspending them. But if you do owe the tax, I want to make sure those folks understand that the interest continues to accrue.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you to you and the Taxpayer Advocate Services for the incredible work you've been doing during this challenging time.
And Senator Menendez, before you go, I just want to make sure people understand you have been leading some of these very important letters with respect to reforms that we need in Internal Revenue Service, and we thank you for it. Okay. I think Senator Grassley is next.
Senator Menendez asked one of the questions I was going to ask, so maybe I won't have to take my full 5 minutes. Ms. Collins, the first lead into the question is fairly long, but I want you to kind of hear what I told the taxpayer advocate in my state about some of the problems we're dealing with. The taxpayers' correspondence backlog and other customer service challenges facing the IRS have reached a crisis level. As you mentioned in your testimony, the current filing season challenges require an all-hands-on-deck strategy. In my view, this is not only applies to the IRS internal operations, but Treasury broadly, the Taxpayer Advocate Service, and Congress as well. For IRS to dig itself out of its current hole, we must all work together. Caseworkers in my state offices in Iowa have been inundated with requests for assistance with the IRS. As someone who takes constituent service very seriously, I instruct my caseworkers to go the extra mile to provide assistance. Unfortunately, my dedicated caseworkers have been frustrated in their work by roadblocks put up by the IRS and, in some cases, by the Taxpayer Advocate Service. For instance, there was a period where a Taxpayer Advocate Service stopped accepting status inquiries regarding original and amended tax returns. I understand this was done because there is little TSA can do to speed up processing of returns. However, state caseworkers often cannot determine if there are any issues with taxpayer accounts beyond processing delays without being able to verify the reason for the delays with the IRS or TAS. I appreciate that TAS has recently updated its policies to provide a status update and case monitoring where it has been over 5 months since the taxpayer filed their returns. This is very helpful and reasonable given the length of the backlog. Going forward, so now I'm getting to my question, going forward, do you have any suggestions on how congressional caseworkers and TAS can work together to more efficiently, effectively get taxpayers the assistance that they deserve?
Thank you for the question. We have been working with the IRS because this is a real challenge. As we alluded to earlier with the lack of technology, when we go into the IRS systems, we cannot see the return on the system. We cannot see the reason for the delays. So we are working with the IRS trying to get a workaround so we can work with your constituents. We are going to ask a little bit more from your staff is to help us sort of be the intermediary with the taxpayer, help us get some of the information more quickly so we can get it in the system and continue to work with the IRS. So we'll be reaching out to all the members to say, you know, again, it's all hands on deck. We all need to help taxpayers get through this.
Ms. Collins, Ms. Lucas-Judy, each of you have discussed the difficulty IRS is having hiring employees to fill customer service and mail processing openings. Ms. Collins, you've noted in your annual report that on average it takes IRS about 3 months to hire external candidates for positions. In the current labor market, I suspect many applicants would have already found a different job during that time. Could either of you help me understand what barriers, legal or otherwise, lead to such a long, drawn-out hiring process or period?
government bureaucracy. I think part of the challenge is the rules that we have in place. What we're asking for is for direct authority for the IRS to be able to just hire people, especially in, right now, the return processing and some of the areas in service, including actually TAS, so we can get the people onboarded quickly. It is a long process. By the time you advertise the position, they apply, you go through the challenges. They also have security checks. So by the time a person could get on board, it could be 60 days, 90 days, 120 days before they even get training. So we need these people on board now to get through this filing season.
Are there any legislative changes Congress should be considering so IRS can have the flexibility to hire employees they need to now get out of this hole that you're in?
Yeah, again, I think the direct hiring authority would be the key to moving quickly, so that if I sat down with you, interviewed you, and I thought you were the right person for the job, I could hire you on the spot versus having to go through the entire process. So that would be a big help for the IRS with some of the challenges that they're facing.
I think my colleague, Senator Portman, is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for having this hearing and the testimony we've had already today regarding the crisis we face, which is overwhelming. 23.5 million pieces of mail, including 8.5 million paper returns, a total of nearly 17.6 million returns. The backlog is having a huge impact on people in my home state and around the country. IRS is overwhelmed, clearly, and we've heard a lot about those challenges today. We should be doing stuff to make it easier, not harder, for the IRS to do its work. I want to ask you about a proposal that is being advocated by some of my colleagues that I think would make it more complicated for the IRS and more difficult to administer the tax code. It's a proposal called the book tax, also called the corporate alternative minimum tax by some, but it's different because it doesn't actually tax income. It was put into the Build Back Better framework. Whether that goes forward or not, I don't know, but the idea has been advocated on its own. It adjusts the financial statement of corporations and, again, doesn't look at the income for tax purposes, but rather the adjusted financial statement, basically creating a parallel tax. And among other concerns, it would override bonus depreciation, alter the foreign tax credit system, provides adverse treatment to investments in state and local bonds, and so on. Joint Tax has said that manufacturers would be hit the hardest because of their capital investment and their use of the code to deal with their physical capital investments. Ms. Lewis, you might be the best one to answer this question. How do you feel about this book tax proposal? What would it do to the IRS and its ability to administer the tax code that it's already struggling with?
Thank you, Senator Portman. This is an important issue to the AICPA. We have commented on it several times. We issued a comment letter back in October, late October, and again in early December. I believe the main issue here is that having a corporate minimum tax or a book tax, obviously on C corporations, being based on their financial statement income as opposed to their taxable income, it takes the definition of taxable income away from Congress and it puts it in an industry, maybe even a foreign country, or what industry looks at financial statements. Financial statements aren't prepared the same way a tax return, totally different rules with generally accepted accounting principles. And, financial statements are made for bankers, for creditors, for shareholders to determine what the book income is. Taxable income is determined based on the tax code, and there are specific things such as depreciation that you mentioned that are different for tax purposes than for financial statement purposes. So the AICPA has grave concerns about the corporate minimum tax. We're happy to look at specific provisions. Our recommendation would be look at specific provisions that are allowed, deductions or credits that are allowed under the tax code that aren't for other reasons, and build a proposal based on that. But as it stands right now, we are not in favor of this corporate minimum tax, even though it would not affect my clients. It does only affect large corporate clients that would have more than $1 billion.
How about IRS administration? What would it do to the IRS right now with all the burdens they're facing?
Yeah, I think it adds one more level of complexity to the IRS. And again, we're mostly focused on what can happen right now.
Let me ask another question. Ms. Collins, we have got obviously this huge backlog and it's affecting everybody, including in my home state, a lot of our constituents who are calling in. One was a low-income taxpayer who had identity theft, and that's unfortunately happening more and more. And he went to a low-income taxpayer clinic in Columbus, Ohio, filed his identity theft form, in April of 2021, and he had to use a form, Form 14039. There's no electronic option. And, of course, he didn't hear back. Why? Because there's this huge backlog, so people aren't looking at paper forms. So he missed his refund. He was totally frustrated. We tried to help. The low-income tax credit, the low-income clinic tried to help, but they had to submit a paper form also to be able to help. Shouldn't we have more of this done electronically at a minimum to be able to help some of these taxpayers who are just struggling to get through the system and get the refunds and move ahead?
Yeah, in our annual report, we focus on some of the barriers for e-filing, and I wholeheartedly agree. The IRS needs to get its IT systems to a point that we can process, in essence, any piece of paper that the taxpayer submits, especially if it's an IRS form. If it's an IRS form, we should be able to file that electronically. But there are a number of forms that unfortunately are not compatible with our system to date.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And, you know, this is an idea that came out of the mid-'90s reforms to do more electronic filing. It's gone well in terms of the tax reform efforts and the code, the returns themselves, but it should be expanded clearly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Portman. Senator Carper, I believe, is ready online. Senator Carper, is that an urban legend? What's the story? Apparently, Senator Carper is not ready to go, which would mean that Senator Langford is next.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. Thanks for all your testimony on it. Ms. Lucas-Judy, I want to be able to respond to something you have written in your testimony. You've written in your testimony the IRS has answered more calls than ever this past time, but only 11% of the calls that actually were inbound were actually answered by an IRS customer service rep. And they had some pretty astounding numbers to be able to go with that. 53% of the calls were disconnected due to a lack of customer service representative. So 53% of the calls just disconnected. 27% of the calls, the taxpayer abandoned the call after hours of waiting there. Another 2% of the calls just got a busy signal and didn't get through at all. So while we answered more calls than ever, really only 11% of the calls were actually answered coming in. That's not a great number to be able to have, is that 89% of your calls didn't get through to actually get an answer on that. Am I correct on those numbers?
You are correct, and a lot of it has to do with the volume of the incoming calls. There was a lot of confusion on the part of taxpayers that prompted calls to IRS. The backlog also was a big contributor to that. People were wondering, they weren't getting enough information from IRS's Where's My Refund application. They weren't getting enough information to know, they'd waited beyond the time frame that IRS typically takes to process a return, to pay a refund, had heard nothing. And so they were starting to call with questions.
Were the same individuals answering calls also the same individuals that are processing returns?
Not processing returns, but processing correspondence.
Okay.
And so that it does.
Did that also increase the backlog then as well?
Right.
Do we need to have individuals that are answering calls and different individuals actually doing correspondence rather than them having to go back and forth, or is that okay to have the same individuals doing both?
Typically, it's been a challenge for the IRS. That's one of the reasons that they get a backlog, usually during the filing season, a backlog of correspondence. It hasn't been as much of a problem in prior years as it was in 2020 and 2021, but as we can see right now, it's a significant challenge.
Yeah. So in your testimony as well, you note that 17% attrition rate for those individuals that are processing returns, that those folks are not staying. The overall attrition rate for the entire agency is 7.6%. So obviously significant higher for those that are processing returns. What do you recommend to be able to get a lower attrition rate for those individuals that are processing returns, or is that just a burnout job?
We've recommended that IRS do a skills gap assessment, that they look across their workforce and figure out places where they have specific needs, figure out put a plan in place, put a strategy out there to try to address those needs, to be thinking beyond just the current filing season about what is the workforce of the future going to look like. That plan, unfortunately, they did create a plan, start to implement it, but the implementation's been delayed. From what we understand from IRS, they expect full implementation of their strategic workforce plan, hopefully August 2022.
Okay. Ms. Collins, I want to go into a conversation you were having with Senator Grassley earlier on hiring authorities. This is something we've talked specifically to the commissioner about. We've had multiple requests to be able to come in. As I'm picking up from your testimony, 5,000 open positions in the IRS, 179 of those jobs have actually been filled. That's a real problem. When you stated there's 120 days to be able to go through the process. So let me ask you this. On the direct hiring authority, I have no issue, by the way, giving IRS direct hiring authority for those key positions that need to be done. We've done that in DOD. We've done that in other areas as well. When we've seen a critical need, we've given them direct hiring authority to be able to pick that up. There's no reason it should take 120 days to be able to go through the process and then start training individuals, which will take months to be able to catch up as well. So my question to you is, with that direct hiring authority, you're not talking about taking away background checks and security verifications for their hiring. What would be the issue with why people wouldn't get direct hiring authority, or what seems to be the fear with not getting that direct hiring authority to the IRS?
I personally don't see a downside to it. I do see an upside to the IRS, especially if we're trying to get this backlog behind us. We need to move quickly. I think in the long term, again, it gives the IRS an opportunity for those key positions, I'm not saying across the board, to be able to be more competitive. If you have a senior person looking at a job at the IRS versus, let's say, an outside firm, being able to commit quickly will make the difference of whether or not we can retain someone versus losing them.
Okay, I hope we can get that done, because obviously everyone at the IRS is asking for that as well. Ms. Lewis, quickly, you noted in your testimony February the 9th, the IRS announced the suspension of more than a dozen letters, including automated collection notices normally issued when the taxpayer owes additional tax or has no record of filing return. That's helpful. Are there other correspondent backlogs and other things that need to be addressed that you think need to be suspended to be able to help protect taxpayers?
Thank you, Senator. And one thing I want to highlight on the backlog and the correspondence, oftentimes our calls and our written correspondence are not about balance dues or an assessment that is made correctly. It's about erroneous notices that come out that we need to change. And because of that, for example, there's a CP 2000 notice, a matching notice, where the IRS sends a notice out to the taxpayer suggesting changes based on what they see, and oftentimes it's not correct and requires correspondence. So we would like that notice to be held. And also, I had mentioned there's notices about levying Social Security benefits on elderly taxpayers while they're working through the backlog. So there are a few other notices that we would like to have stopped.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague. I believe Senator Carper and Senator Casey are available online, and we're getting close, colleagues, to the end. So if there are other members who want to come, besides the very patient Senator Young and Senator Hassan, the word should go forward. Okay, Senator Carper.
Yeah, thanks so much. Let me say to our witness, thanks very, very much for joining us today. I've been on this committee for over a dozen years. I've cared about this issue for a long time before this, including when I was governor. I'm delighted to have you here and to tell us that we ought to do our job. There's a comic strip a long time ago, Pogo, and in Pogo there's a famous question he asked: who is the enemy? And the enemy is us. And we in the Congress are just dilatory in terms of meeting our responsibilities to provide the tools the IRS needs, provide the funding the IRS needs, the technology, the people, and we need to do something about it. And we keep having these conversations. This is not the first time we've been at this well, and I'm tired of talking about it and just anxious to get stuff done. Question for Ms. Collins. How do the workforce challenges of the IRS currently impact customer service, and what steps can Congress and the IRS take to support hiring and retention at the agency? I'm sure you've been asked this already. I'm asking it again. Go right ahead.
Yeah, right now I think the focus is on getting current and getting the backlog. So that is probably the number one challenge, is getting people in who can help process those returns as well as address the correspondence, the notices that we keep talking about, and getting that behind us. So that is key right now to getting that resolved.
All right, another question for you, if I could, Ms. Collins. Not only have I been a strong advocate of providing tools, technology, and so forth for the IRS, I've also been a long-time supporter of existing resources to help vulnerable taxpayers, including the free file program, including the volunteer income tax assistance program, including the tax counseling for the elderly program. And I believe to my core that these tools can help taxpayers avoid making mistakes on their tax returns and in turn avoid some of the hurdles with processing and receiving their refunds. And a question again for you, Ms. Collins, how can the IRS make it easier for taxpayers to access these programs, and what should we do in the Congress to consider to strengthen these critical tools?
Yeah, I would agree with you that these tools are very valuable, especially for the low-income folks. The VITA program, TICE program, and again, I'd like to do a shout out for all those who volunteers, because it truly is a lot of dedicated accountants and enrolled agents that offer their time up. But we can always do a better job, especially in the underserved communities, getting the word out as to what resources are available, either reaching out to, again, as you said, VITA or TICE, or letting them understand what they can do through the IRS's free file program so that they could file the returns both electronically at no cost.
A third question I would ask, we know that the IRS backlogs have created very significant delays and frankly a lot of confusions for taxpayers. They call our office every day, offices in Delaware. We have 3 of them. Many of my constituents have reached out to our casework staff up and down the state because those constituents have received confusing and outdated automatic tax collection notices. I'm pleased that the IRS recently responded to these concerns by announcing the suspension of these notices as the agency works its way through the backlog of returns. And this would be for all three witnesses, what other steps should the IRS consider taking during the current filing season to help minimize taxpayer confusion and provide more efficient taxpayer service? This would be for all 3 of you.
I'll go ahead and start. I think one of the issues that we've been looking at and recommending within the IRS is really penalties. How do we relieve taxpayers of penalties? And more importantly, it's the touch point with the IRS. We want to stop the phone calls. We want to stop the letters. What can we do fairly, apply it across the board? One of our recommendations has been the IRS has what they call, it's an administrative waiver, first-time abate. And what we would like to recommend is that the IRS apply it across the board systemically so that we don't have to have phone calls, we don't have to send letters, taxpayers don't have to respond. Things like that, I think the IRS, we should start thinking outside the box as to how the IRS can help taxpayers during this backlog and during this challenging time.
All right, thank you. Same question, Ms. Lewis, Ms. Lucas-Judy, just quickly, if you will.
I would agree to get more information out there to taxpayers. We've made a number of recommendations and worked with IRS on getting more information on its website, getting information into Where's My Refund. And also we have a recommendation open to IRS to just put a plan out there, a strategy for managing the backlog that it still has from 2020.
And Senator, we have asked for 4 specific recommendations. One is to temporarily postpone those automated compliance actions. 2 is to adjust the hold times. When you call the IRS, they will put a hold for perhaps 8 or 9 weeks, but as we know, it's going to take 4 months for that to get, or more, for that inquiry to get answered. So that could cut down on phone calls, having to call again, liberalize the reasonable cause penalty waiver, and also estimated tax payment relief for those who have already paid in at least 70% of their tax. I agree that first-time abatement is a great tool and an opportunity to be used. We do have to be concerned about that because you can only use that one time in every few years, and that could be an issue for those who probably already used it during the 2019 or 2020 filing season, or those that didn't want to automatic first-time abate but that actually had a reasonable cause. So we would want to make sure that we look at that, but absolutely penalty abatement needs to be part of the solution.
Thank you all so much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Casey is also online.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much. And I want to start with commendation. I want to commend you for having this hearing and spotlighting these issues, and also for the advocacy that that you've been bringing to bear on getting the resources necessary to give the IRS what it needs. And I can extend that commendation, of course, to the IRS employees for the great work that they've done under adverse circumstances. Ms. Collins, I'm going to really focus my question and starting with an observation, but let me start with you on your testimony discussing the importance in this tax season for filers who are eligible for refundable tax credits. In particular, you said, and I'm quoting, millions of taxpayers rely on the benefits from these programs to pay their basic living expenses, unquote. I couldn't agree more, and I think most Americans would agree with that. A report came out just this Monday that said that child care costs have been growing faster than inflation since 2019. And care costs now are about $11,800 per infant, for example, just in Pennsylvania. So not many people know this information. We've got to do a better job of telling people what families are up against every day. But one thing we do know, and again, this is not widely known, but we're going to make sure that people do know about it, is that when Democrats passed the rescue plan, as part of that, we passed a $4,000 credit per child for child care expenses. This is separate and apart from the child tax credit. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the child and dependent care tax credit. I'm saying it slowly because we got to keep this in front of people. So this, and if you want to shorthand it, it's really about the child care credit, not the child tax credit. We also made this child and dependent care tax credit fully refundable in the rescue plan, so that for the first time, lower income families could benefit. So the first question I have, Ms. Collins, is do public outreach and information campaigns affect how many people can claim tax credits like the one I just outlined?
Yeah, I think outreach is key to getting the message out to communities and to taxpayers. So I would agree that any way we could get the message out, whether it's through a newspaper, a TV, your offices, your website, IRS website, our website, I think we all have to get the message out there that these benefits are available to taxpayers and explain what they need to do to apply and receive them.
Thank you. And here's the problem. And it pains me to report this, but here are the facts. Number one, there are no fact sheets available from the IRS that can explain how families can benefit from this newly eligible credit. Number two, a Google search result for this child and dependent care tax credit on the IRS website is out of date. It's from information from 2017. And thirdly, the IRS even has a page entitled Coronavirus Tax Relief for Families, but the page doesn't even mention the child and dependent care tax credit, which can provide thousands to families. When I say thousands, here's what I mean. Single parent, one child who has a $50,000 income with child care expenses of $8,000, and this is real life for people. So income of $50,000, child care expenses of $8,000. That single parent can save under the new version of this credit $3,400. $3,400. Here's another example: married couple, 2 children, making $75,000 with $12,000 in child care expenses. Again, this is real life for people. That family making $75,000 with $12,000 in child care expenses can save $4,800 because of this tax credit in the American Rescue Plan. So we got to do something about it. We're going to do our part. We need the administration to do it, the IRS, the Treasury Department, members of Congress, both parties, both houses, to get the message out. I know I'm out of time, but we'll send some more questions for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Senator Casey, thank you for all the leadership you've provided on this crucial child care credit. It's absolutely essential for so many families in this country. We've got families spending a lot more, for example, on child care than rent, and so many people in bureaucratic lines and the like, again, just trying to get what is essential to be able to be part of the workforce. I think Senator Young is next, and then the exceptionally patient Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Chairman. The COVID-19 pandemic has shaken every aspect of our economy, and the IRS was not immune to the disruptions caused by widespread telework, worker shortages, and increased responsibilities as our country fought to maintain Americans' health and economic stability. As has been mentioned repeatedly this morning, the IRS is experiencing considerable backlogs and delays. During the pandemic, my office has worked tirelessly to assist Hoosiers who struggled with issues in getting their tax refunds, EIP payments, and amending their tax returns. Over the course of the pandemic, my office has helped over 1,000 Hoosier taxpayers, and yet we still have over 150 constituent cases outstanding with the IRS, and that number, unfortunately, grows daily. One of these cases is over 2 years old and still waiting on a resolution from the IRS. Roughly half of our current cases involve original 2020 unprocessed tax returns. We're already in the midst of the 2021 tax filing season, and the IRS has still not processed 2020 tax returns. My constituents are understandably quite frustrated. My staff are frustrated. I'm frustrated. I want to thank the witnesses for testifying here today. We need improved customer service for Hoosiers who are simply doing what the law requires of them, filing their taxes. I look forward to hearing your perspective on how the IRS can deliver that essential service to my constituents. Ms. Collins, first, I want to thank you and the hardworking men and women of the Taxpayer Advocate Service for your assistance in many of the constituent casework matters I just described. As I'm sure you know, TIGTA's 2020 IRS audit included a report that at the height of the pandemic, the IRS was unable to function properly because of printer issues that persisted for months. In many cases, printers were down simply because the ink cartridges were out and no one bothered to replace them. Now, I understand that a number of these printer issues occurred at the IRS's Kansas City Processing Center, where most of my constituents' IRS submissions end up. You recently visited the Kansas City Processing Center. Can you please share a few brief observations from that visit?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think, as we talk about paper all the time, and I've, commented paper's not the IRS's friend, paper's the IRS's kryptonite. But when you're physically in the room and you see the mounds and the piles of those returns sitting there, when I was looking at it, I was looking at individuals, small businesses, companies. These are returns crying out, saying, please process me. And it was very much looking at the IRS. We should be a very high-tech tax administration. But we were pretty much, I was appalled as to how much we manually do. We have a manual processing from it to arrive at the docks all the way to processing to they separate checks from the envelopes, they remove staples, they hand stamp, they move the return all the way through by humans. We should have that automated. It should not be in the condition that it's in.
Well, I'm not personalizing this. It sounds like the scene from a Soviet bureau. Really. I mean, centrally planned economy and so forth. So I know there are a number of individuals who are working hard to try and remedy this. And this is why it's important we hold these oversight hearings as well. So, the IRS frequently says it is near current on opening mail. And yet many of my constituents wait for months, sometimes close to a year, for any indication from the IRS that it has received a mailed return or other tax document. Now, I understand there's a difference between opening the mail and actually processing the mail, but it seems hard to believe that activity should take upwards of a year. So, Ms. Collins, where are the bottlenecks in the processing system? And during your Kansas City visit, where did you see opportunities for improvement?
Yeah, part of the challenge are resources. We just do not have enough employees to move it through quickly. So that is a challenge that the IRS is dealing with. They are looking at, I believe they're going to be going out, if they haven't done it already, requesting bid for companies to come in and do some of the manual labor because it doesn't have to have a highly specialized skill set. But there are positions where they do the review and other things within the IRS that has to have more of that skill set and training. So that's where they need to move their employees around and get rid of that bottleneck. But paper really is the challenge because we do not have an automated process to move that through the system quickly. So we need to solve the paper problem.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to following up with you and doing whatever I can to help improve the system. I know everyone here agrees our constituents deserve better. Thank you.
Thank my colleague. We're going to work very closely with the members, and at this point, we are going to lock in the order. Let's see. Senator Thune is next, then Senator Hassan, and then Senator Daines. And I know other senators are contemplating getting here. We will work them in, but folks have been very patient. So Senator Thune is next, followed by Senator Hassan and Senator Daines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our panelists for your testimony. My offices in South Dakota get a lot of phone calls and emails about the IRS, and South Dakotans generally call about getting help with their refund, or they simply can't get in touch with the IRS. The National Taxpayer Advocate Report seems to back that up. According to the report, at the end of last year, at least 10 million returns remained unprocessed, and the IRS only answered about 11% of taxpayer calls. The report also found the processing time for some taxpayer correspondence now runs 6 months or longer. Ms. Collins, how have the new responsibilities placed upon the IRS, including new transfer payment programs and the 6-month advance CTC program, impacted basic customer service such as picking up phones and taxpayer correspondence?
It basically impacted in a number of ways. Telephones has been a real challenge because although a lot of the legislation has been very helpful to taxpayers, it creates a lot of confusion, and that confusion causes folks to reach for the phone logically. And so we've had a very high volume, in fact, abnormally high volume of calls this past year, which has caused a lot of challenges in the customer service area. So that is one area that has been a real problem.
And why? And tell me, is it accurate that the IRS is only answering 11% of taxpayer calls?
Unfortunately, that is the case, yes.
Let me ask you about this recent IRS notification that millions of Americans may owe additional taxes this year. And the reason, of course, was that many families received advanced child tax credit payments that they may have been too high. The monthly program, which was passed last March and implemented in July, led to increased overpayments. And as a result, many taxpayers are going to face surprise tax bills this year, which will be a tough cash flow problem for lots of Americans who are already experiencing 40-year high inflation. Ms. Collins, what type of problems do you see these advanced CDC overpayments having on taxpayers this year, and how is the IRS going to handle that?
Yeah, I think for taxpayers, as you said, some of them may have a safe harbor and will not have to pay the money back. Others may have to pay the money back, and for them, I think it will be a surprise that they're in that situation. I believe the IRS wants to work with those folks and make arrangements and assist them in the collections, but I think the real challenge is going to be, as you pointed out, the surprise that they didn't know they would have to pay the money back. But again, the legislation does provide a safe harbor, so facts and circumstances, depending on the individual, whether or not it will impact them.
But I assume it's going to be another deluge of work for the IRS, which is already having a hard time keeping up, clearly, with the current demand.
Yeah, if the taxpayer has any inconsistency or discrepancies on their return with the IRS records, yes, that will require manual processing, so that return would be pulled out of the system and processed. So that is a potential challenge and a concern we have as to the amount of discrepancies on these returns. It's going to cause additional caseload and add more to the inventory of the backlog. So we need to get rid of the old backlog, but we don't need to create new backlog.
The IRS provided an $86 million contract to ID.me that would have required taxpayers to verify their identities through facial recognition technology, which was extremely concerning. to my constituents, both for privacy and safety reasons. It's also my understanding that ID.me would hold on to that data for up to 7 years. Ms. Collins, can you confirm that the IRS has stopped its use of facial recognition technology with ID.me?
That is my understanding, yes.
Do you know how many taxpayers were led to use the facial recognition technology in order to opt out of the advanced CTC?
I don't have the exact number. I can get that for you, but I know it was north of, and maybe single-digit millions of taxpayers went through the ID.me program.
Okay. Based on the work that you've done, is the IRS capable, or does it have the appropriate infrastructure in place to properly protect this type of data?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an IT person, so I'll start with that. But I do think giving taxpayers access to their records is vital. And so the advantage of ID.me, what it allowed is the authentication process. Rather than having 30 to 40% being able to access their records, it increased to north of 70. To me, that is a huge benefit for taxpayers. But at the same time, I do recognize the concern of the security and privacy. So what I'd like all of us to work together with the IRS is how do we get a secure environment that provides protections for the taxpayers, but also at the same time, how do we get as many people to access their own records as possible? And so that's my only concern of quickly switching away from ID.me. I want to make sure that we don't harm taxpayers who are seeking to get access to their own records.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time.
Thank you, Senator Thune. And colleagues, here's the state of play with respect to ID.me. This committee led the effort. Senator Crapo and I have been talking about this because we felt that people shouldn't be required to submit to selfies in order to get essential government services. So I was very pleased that the commissioner responded quickly. They are now transitioning away from this. And in fact, yesterday, Senator Brown and also Senator Warren and I started the effort to extend this to other agencies. And the bottom line here is smart technology policies, for example, address your privacy and your security. Not so smart technology policies give you less of both. So that's what we're going to work on. We're going to do it in a bipartisan way. I look forward to working with Senator Crapo. Senator Hassan's been so patient. Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you and Senator Crapo for holding this hearing and for the witnesses for testifying today. I'm going to start with a question to you, Ms. Collins. As you've heard from so many of my colleagues, Granite Staters have been reaching out to my office in record numbers for help because they've been unable to reach a real person at the IRS. And according to your annual report to Congress, and as Senator Lankford has mentioned, Senator Thune just mentioned, taxpayers who tried to call the IRS last year were only able to speak to a customer service representative 11% of the time, often after sitting on hold. To address this, you've recommended that the IRS implement an automated callback system, among other technologies. How can the IRS upgrade its technology to improve phone service for taxpayers?
Yeah, I think the callback feature would be key to offer it across all of their lines. They have multiple phone lines. And right now, it's only on a portion of the phone lines.
Okay.
Sorry about this.
Speaking of phones.
Speaking of phones, right on cue. So we do think it would be helpful, but the challenge is callback only works for the amount of individuals that are answering the phone. So if they have 15,000, let's say, customer service representative, you can only have callback for the equivalent of 15,000 individuals. So if you have 200 and I believe it was 82 million phone calls, they do not have the resources to have callback on every one of those calls.
Okay, so technology is a piece of this, but having the numbers and the capacity match is another piece of it too. Okay. To Ms. Lewis, I wrote a letter to the IRS in January highlighting the problems that the unprecedented tax return backlog has created for Granite Staters. And we have heard from a number of senators concerns about this, but just an example, my office has heard from constituents who paid their taxes and saw that the IRS cashed their checks, but then my constituents received non-payment and penalty notices from the IRS because the agency had not officially processed the tax returns. Although the IRS recently suspended some of those automatic notices. This has created confusion and real concern, obviously, among taxpayers. So, Ms. Lewis, how are tax preparers helping families navigate these issues during the backlog? And how could IRS further address concerns of taxpayers who receive these notices?
Thank you, Senator. And I feel for your constituent, because that is who we deal with every single day.
Yep.
And I wish I had a lot of hope for you, because the answer is trying to get the backlog relieved so that we can reach out to the IRS on those issues. Right now, it is probably dialing into the phone line 20 and 22 and 24 times before you can actually get someone possibly to answer, and then be on hold for an hour. And then hope to not get cut off.
Right.
So I think the only answer is to get rid of the backlog. And the only answer to getting rid of the backlog is to stop the notices so that taxpayer doesn't get another 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 notices before it's resolved.
Right.
That's really the solution right now.
Thank you. I want to turn to the overall issue of IT modernization and start with you, Ms. Lucas-Judy. And this follows up on another group of questions you've already had from other senators. But I've been working to modernize outdated IT systems at federal agencies all across the board. They cost more to maintain than newer systems, and they deliver worse service to taxpayers, worst of both worlds. Many of the IRS's IT systems are severely outdated, such as its tax processing mainframe, which is 62 years old. These outdated IT systems have worsened the current tax return backlog and led to extensive taxpayer service problems for people in New Hampshire who have contacted my office. So how can IRS expedite plans to modernize its obsolete tax processing mainframe to cut operations costs and improve services?
IRS does have an IT modernization plan, and GAO is currently reviewing that. We hope to have a report out on that later this year. But what I can say overall is that it's very important for the service to be able to have an inventory of what technology it currently has, to understand what it needs for the future, what it's going to cost to get there, have a schedule in place with clear timeframes and deliverables along the way, and then to be able to monitor its implementation of that plan and communicate to Congress and to the public its progress along the way.
Well, thank you for that, and I look forward to continuing to work with you and the GAO on this issue. I have another question I'll submit for the record to Ms. Collins. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Colleagues are all appearing now, and we're trying to be fair to all sides. Next will be Senator Daines, followed by Senator Warren.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We all know that taxpayers are in for a very tough tax filing season, which comes on the heels of a difficult filing season last year, a year in which taxpayers had more trouble reaching the IRS by telephone than any year in history. That is unacceptable, and it also imposes huge burdens on taxpayers. One solution we should consider that might help solve this problem for our first responders is a bipartisan bill that I have called Putting First Responders First Act. Since 1985, service-connected disability compensation has been tax exempt following Revenue Ruling 85-105. But oftentimes, IRS auditors are not aware of Revenue Ruling 85-105 and demand that injured first responders in Montana and across the country pay taxes on their injury-related compensation. It's also not uncommon for first responders who are often facing significant life changes to be unaware of the revenue ruling and unnecessarily pay sizable tax bills. So passing this bill at Senate Bill 1618 would codify the principle of this revenue ruling, and it would clarify that this injury-related compensation is, in fact, tax exempt, just as Revenue Ruling 85-105 states. Further complicating this situation is that injury-related compensation does become taxable once a first responder reaches the retirement age of 65, although his or her injuries remain and the individual's retirement compensation level is limited due to prematurely leaving the workforce. So the Putting First Responders First Act would provide clarity to both IRS employees and first responders and keeps injury-related compensation tax exempt after the retirement age. I think it's the least we can do for them after their heroic efforts throughout the pandemic and through today. Turning to my questions, Ms. Collins, do you think that Putting First Responders First Act would serve a dual purpose of relieving our disabled first responders of the burden imposed by erroneous audits, while also removing any doubt from the minds of IRS auditors that service-connected disability compensation is tax exempt?
Yeah, IRS agents should be following the revenue ruling, but as you stated, codifying it takes it to a higher level of authority, and I think that would be something that the IRS would be agents should follow the law.
Just to drill a bit further on that, and this could be for Ms. Collins as well as Ms. Lewis, let's say a disabled first responder receives a notice from the IRS that they are being audited. What type of luck might they have if they pick up the phone to call the IRS to explain the situation?
I guess the good news is if you're under IRS audit, you don't have to call the toll-free line. You get to talk to the revenue agent. So you don't have the same challenges of calling that 800 toll-free line.
So we have any idea if we basically about a 1 in 10 shot right now on the regular line, what are the odds if you're audited to call this other line?
I don't know if we have any statistics, but it would be better. Anything would be better than 11%.
Well, you can't fall out of a basement, I think,
right.
they say. Oh.
But I think the real challenge is, educating. Unfortunately, not every IRS agent is familiar with every code section. If we were to put the codes in front of us, the Internal Revenue Code is, I don't know how many inches thick. It is a very complex document. So I think we have to make sure we educate IRS agents. But if it is codified, it should be easier for them to find and follow the law.
Ms. Collins?
Senator, I agree with Ms. Collins' comments that if it was a full-blown audit, you actually have an auditor assigned to you, maybe that would help. But in reality, what happens is it's not an audit. It's a notice. It's a notice that comes that says that the income doesn't match and call this 800 number, and that's where the problem lies, just along with all of these other notices we're talking about, these matching notices or whatever. It's not a full-blown audit, and I wish I could offer some luck.
Just in fairness, though, anytime you get a letter from the IRS, and you may know it's not a full-blown audit, but I can tell you if you want to get the pulse rate going and the blood pressure up, a little note from the IRS saying something's wrong. Yeah.
Yes. And that's my point, is that our clients are getting these and worrying about these. They don't, it's a big, long official notice, and it looks very scary. And I hate that. We deal with it every day. And so that notice needs to be responded to, again, adding to the backlog of the phones and the notices when you know that tax return is correct.
All right, I'm out of time. Well, I just went to the IRS.gov site. Before I came to Congress, I was part of a software company that helps improve the customer experience. I just have a recommendation here. When you go to that IRS.gov, there's a search tab up there. If you hit search and then put in disability compensation, you actually can find some pretty good information. But then it says, how can we help you? If you go down here and go down to your get answers to your tax questions, and then you put in disability compensation, nothing pops up. It's a real simple, easy fix. And I just would encourage you all to think about customer service from the end working in, not from the in working out. Thank you.
Thank my colleague. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So even before the pandemic hit, the IRS was in trouble. Corporate lobbyists and anti-tax extremists have slashed the IRS budget by 20% over the last decade, leaving the agency with 22% fewer staff and decades-old IT systems, forcing it to outsource key capabilities to profiteering private companies. Now, this means that the IRS can't chase down wealthy tax cheats or adequately assist the majority of Americans trying to honestly fill out their taxes and claim refunds. As of this filing system with ongoing pandemic-related challenges, let's face it, it is worse than ever. This has to end. We need to invest in the IRS. And today I'd like to highlight a key investment that we can make, simplified filing. and how it would help address precisely the kinds of rampant delays that taxpayers are facing this year. Right now, the IRS is advising taxpayers to file electronically and accurately in order to avoid delays. So, Ms. Collins, as National Taxpayer Advocate, you know that taxpayers have a lot to keep track of when they're filing their taxes, from W-2 income to advanced child tax credit payments to the pandemic stimulus checks. What happens if a family makes an error on their return and doesn't get the number exactly right?
Yeah, that is a challenge that the IRS dealt with last year that has caused part of the backlog is the numbers that a lot of individuals, over 11 million, put on their stimulus did not match the IRS's.
Right. So what happens when there's a mismatch?
So they pull it out of the processing and they send the IRS our notices again. They send the taxpayer notice. The taxpayer gets to respond. And it does slow the process down. So it is a real challenge. And some of those are still sitting out there 10 months later.
Yeah. 10 months later that people could still be sitting out there. So here's the thing that gets me about this, though. The IRS actually has all this data from the employers who tell the IRS how much the employees made each year, or from the IRS's own data on how much it sent to families in those CTC payments or stimulus checks. But even though it already has the information, the IRS quizzes the tax filer to make sure that the tax filer can accurately enter that information. And if the numbers don't match exactly, then it's lose-lose. The taxpayer faces huge delays, as you point out. The IRS wastes resources taking a second look at the return and falls further behind in helping everyone else. So, Ms. Collins, if the IRS already has this information on taxpayer income, why doesn't it just give it to the taxpayers? Wouldn't it make the returns more accurate and processing much faster?
Yeah, this past year, what the IRS is doing is sending out 2 letters, one on the advanced
Yeah, I get the letters.
Right.
Why don't they just push out the information?
I am a big proponent of an online account, and I very much would like the IRS to have that data available and the taxpayers could access it, possibly set it up to download it to go directly into a taxpayer's return or to provide to their CPA or their accountant.
Okay, so now we're speaking each other's language on this. This is precisely why I have proposed in my Tax Filing Simplification Act that the IRS invest in its IT systems so that taxpayers could download their IRS data directly into tax prep software. Right now, Americans waste an average of 11 hours and $200 preparing their tax returns. And they still risk getting it wrong and waiting months and months for their returns. With simplified filing, they could plug in IRS data, take a look, maybe make a tweak if they think there's something that's not right there, and then send it in minutes instead of hours. So, Ms. Collins, do you think that the IRS should commit to creating this kind of simplified filing tool, allowing taxpayers to download their data from the IRS right into tax filing software?
It's definitely something I'd recommend they look into because they do have the W-2 information, 1099 information, any of the credits that the IRS has paid out, and it would simplify it for taxpayers. And I'm a big proponent of simplifying everything on taxes.
Me too. And I agree with you on this, but we have to remember there's somebody who doesn't agree. There are giant corporations like Intuit that hate this idea because they rake in billions of dollars each year by tricking taxpayers into buying unnecessary tax preparation products. There are also right-wing extremists who want an IRS that can't serve folks at the bottom and can't reach tax cheats at the top. So my view on this, it's time to put hardworking Americans at the center of our tax policy, simplify, make it easier, let them be able to pay their taxes and move on with their lives. We can't put Americans through another bad tax filing season. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague. And Ms. Collins, you certainly struck a chord when you said, I'm for simplified everything. And I think that certainly resonates. I very much favor this idea of giving people the option of being able to do what Senator Warren is talking about. And obviously, it goes best if it's in tandem with the technology upgrades. In other words, that's really the promised land, is to simplify things and get the technology upgrades, and I'm going to work closely with Senator Warren. Okay, next will be, I believe it's Senator Brown and then Senator Barrasso. Senator Brown, are you?
I am. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
and
you,
then
Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Barrasso, who's been very patient.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for, Ms. Collins, thank you for your work. Not surprisingly to my colleagues, want to ask about the American Rescue Plan and the child tax credit. You've heard these numbers, 92% of the kids in my state, of families with children under 18, I think the same, and Senator Cortez Masto, Senator Warner's state, are benefit from this expansion, $3,000 in almost every case, $3,000 at least tax cut. Parents, I hear over and over, are less stressed about affording the rent or groceries or new school clothes because of that. What steps, my question, Ms. Collins, and then I'll just turn it to my colleagues because I kind of feel like I broke the queue a little bit here. What steps should the IRS take to make it easier for families to get the full child tax credit to which they're entitled?
Yeah, I think the challenge for the IRS is really reaching those underserved communities and educating the taxpayers as to what benefits are out there. For more financially comfortable individual and larger corporations, they have access to accountants, CPAs, other professionals, but it's usually the lower income folks that do not. So programs such as VITA and TICE are very important, and the outreach the IRS does with all of its partners that it works with is hugely important to getting that message out there.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the work. I will just close there. Thank you for the work you're doing on the child tax credit. It's been such a good committee effort to change people's lives in about the most dramatic way we've ever done on this committee. So thank you for that. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Senator Brown. You may not have heard earlier there was discussion about, well, there might have been cheating in the Earned Income Tax Credit or the Child Tax Program. And I said, you know, those people are constantly, every day, just trying to pay the bills and trying to pay for rent and groceries and shoes. And of course, fraud is fraud. And anywhere in government where you see it, it ought to be rooted out. I just think you got to start at the top. And wealthy tax cheaters are basically living the dream as a result of all these broken systems. So when we're talking about going after fraud, start at the top. Senator Barrasso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Crapo, for holding the important hearing. I also want to thank all of the members here of the panel for all the time and discussion of these really critical issues. Ms. Collins, I know my constituents in Wyoming certainly appreciate all the work that you and the taxpayer advocates do in Wyoming. Very grateful. You know, given this massive backlog of unprocessed returns from last year, you issued the Taxpayer Advocate Directive to the IRS. It required the IRS to either complete processing of all the backlogged amendment tax returns by the end of last year or provide a plan for processing. The IRS clearly didn't meet the deadline, but it did provide a plan. Among other steps, the IRS employees have been reassigned to help process this backlog mail, and the IRS has halted some automated notices that we've been talking about. In your view, how successful has their plan been?
Well, they are just beginning it, so we'll have to determine how successful it is months down the road. My concern is, based on the numbers that I've been seeing and we've been monitoring, this is not going to be a quick fix. My goal for IRS is to be out of this by December. It is not going to happen tomorrow. They could move all these employees over. It's still going to be a very time-consuming challenge for the IRS.
And Ms. Lucas-Judy, thank you also for being here. Always been helpful to have the data and the analysis from the GAO during these conversations. You know, one of our goals, of course, is to ensure that government is accountable to the taxpayers. In your testimony, you mentioned the IRS suspended a much larger number of returns in 2021 because of error resolution than in previous years. The IRS staff then had to review these suspended returns, which resulted in additional processing delays, substantial delays of refunds to these taxpayers. You mentioned refund delays of several months. So I mean, that's a long time for a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck, who might be depending on their refund, as most people are. So given the IRS will most likely see another large number of filings suspended for error resolution this year, are there some steps that the IRS can take to speed up or better automate this process and ensure that the constituents aren't waiting again months for a refund?
As part of our ongoing review, IRS just told us the other day that it's put some tools in place to try to do some of that, to automate some of these where the errors are due to problems with the refundable credits. And so we're going to be continuing to follow up with them to see how successful that is. But primarily they still have a backlog from 2020 in terms of things that are caught up in errors and trying to work through processing that. And so we thought it was important for them to put a timeline in place to get information out there to the public on when they're going to be able to resolve and pay those refunds, as well as be able to put something in place for dealing with 2021 and now 2022.
Can I follow up? Because in your testimony, you also discussed the taxpayers' dissatisfaction with the IRS's, quote, "where's my refund" tool. You'd think that having a convenient online tool could actually decrease the number of calls to the IRS. That doesn't seem to be the case here. So based on your analysis, what features or functions would be most successful additions to this "where's my refund" tool?
This is another place where I'm pleased to say that partly as a result of our ongoing work, IRS has put some additional information out there into "where's my refund." The problem was that taxpayers didn't really get an interim status update there. They would see their return was being processed and processed and processed and processed, and it would go on, but there wasn't anything until the refund was actually approved and they had a date. And so they were calling, they were writing, they were filing another return, and that was creating the backlog or contributing to the backlog. And so we think it's important for IRS to make these interim steps to get more information into the application, but also to ultimately modernize it and upgrade it, make it part of this online account so that there's more information available to taxpayers.
Ms. Lewis, you're there shaking your head up. And anything you'd like to add to that? I mean, you obviously were agreeing with.
We are up for anything that will reduce the backlog. If we can stop the calls and the notices and the touch points, if we can just minimize the touch points that we're having to have as taxpayers and practitioners with the IRS.
Ms. Collins, anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm in agreement. The "where's my refund," the challenge was, again, it'll tell you the front end and the back end, but it doesn't tell you anything in the middle and what you would have to do or what the time frame is.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. Senator Cortez Masto is next.
Thank you, and thank you all for the hearing today. I know it's been a long morning. I'm going to be brief. I'm curious from the panel members to really answer this question, if you can. Is the IRS adequately funded to address the concerns that you're bringing out today with the backlog and the touch points? I'm curious, is there something that we need to be aware of here at a federal level? So, Ms. Collins, let me ask you that and start with you.
Yeah, I think that the challenge is, if you look at the backlog, the short-term resolution, we need to just move our employees around. The IRS needs to take their employees and put them on the backlog because the process will take too long if we have to go out and hire additional resources. In the long term, absolutely, the IRS needs additional resources, and they need it across all lanes. That's been a challenge for the IRS, and unfortunately, taxpayers are paying the price of that.
And have they been traditionally underfunded even pre-pandemic?
Yeah, if you look at the funding has gone down over the last 10 years. Unfortunately, the workload has increased, and we've also lost more employees in the last 10 years. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation that the IRS is dealing with.
Thank you. In the interest of time, let me ask one final question. Ms. Lewis, 80 million tax filers in 2018 had trusted return preparers to ensure they accurately prepared and filed their taxes. There is no shortage of businesses claiming to offer tax preparation services in my home state of Las Vegas. Beyond the minimum competency requirements already in place, what else can the IRS do to improve the quality and the reliability of return preparation services, and also ensure the transparency and fairness to taxpayers that need to rely on their services to meet their obligations during tax season?
Thank you, Senator. And we do want to thank this committee and Senator Brown, Cardin, and Wyden, and several senators have worked toward preparer regulation. And let me just be clear, the AICPA has steadfastly supported preparer regulation. We do believe that having those minimum standards will help the tax system, the voluntary compliance system. We do agree that preparer regulation is important. We have supported legislation in that realm, and I think that would help some of the unscrupulous tax preparers. We do support the concept broadly and look forward to working with you guys supporting that prepare regulation legislation.
Thank you. And finally, let me just recommend and commend the men and women who work at the IRS. They have done an incredible job with increased burden upon them to really focus on the needs of our taxpayers, and they have little resources to do so. So thank you, everyone. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. As we wind towards an end, I'm glad that you and several of our colleagues are finally singling out the terrific work that's being done by many people at the IRS under incredibly hard circumstances. Okay, Senator Warner will close.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you and Senator Cortez Masto just grabbed my opening comments. I wanted to join both of you in commending the IRS workers. A lot of them live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, both at headquarters and our regional offices. And we asked them to do a lot more last year with the stimulus payments and child tax credit payments. And I absolutely believe, and I know you share this belief, Mr. Chairman, that we got to make real investments in the IRS. I know it's not going to deal with the current backlog, but we got to make real substantive investments in people, personnel, IT. It's crazy the systems are so old. I guess one of the things, and I know there's been some discussion on this already, but we've got the backlogs, I think still about 6 million. I hear about it every day. I know there's some debate on this issue, but I'd ask the panel pretty briefly, if you could, should we go ahead, recognizing the backlog that's out there and what's going to be already still a difficult filing system and still remnants of COVID, both in terms of the workforce and otherwise, and look at some level of a delay in the deadlines this year?
Well, I'll start and jump in here. I don't think the IRS needs additional time. In fact, I think it will cause more challenges for the IRS because they have to go in and reprogram everything. It also impacts states. It also impacts preparers. So I personally do not see it as a benefit right now for taxpayers. They have the ability to file on extension, and they have the additional time till October 15th if it's an individual. So again, my personal view is I think it would actually be harder for tax administration and not necessarily beneficial for taxpayers.
Others on the panel?
The AFCPA at this point does not advocate moving the tax due date. We obviously will be monitoring this as things happen. Our point is most of our members would like to keep the April 18th date, and the ones that do not have various dates. So we're not taking a position on that at this point, but we do have one very clear position. If the due date is moved, we want it to be announced as soon as possible, sooner rather than later, not just right before the deadline. And then also that it should include not just the filing, but payments and also the first quarter estimated tax payment that would be due.
Well, I am, as I can relate to some of those comments as a former governor, know how it does throw a bit of a monkey wrench in the state filings, although I would also say, not only IRS, but we've got to take into consideration taxpayers themselves. But I clearly feel, and I know that those folks who've still got payment delays from the 2020 tax season will have to be filing extensions. But I think this is an issue. And my last moment, I just wanted to ask both of you as well. Are we setting expectations right? Can the IRS, and this maybe goes back to where the last Ms. Lewis just mentioned, are we setting appropriate expectations? Can the IRS do a better job of forewarning, and is there a systemic way to do that? Ms. Lewis and then Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Senator. I believe we highlighted this when we discussed the IRS funding issue. We do believe that expectations have to be set for the funding for any request that the IRS makes. What do they need? What resources do they need? What help do they need? but we really want it to be balanced between enforcement and also customer service. There needs to be an expectation of customer service, and that's not being met right now.
Yeah, and I would agree that we need to get the word out to the taxpayers. You know, again, part of my job as being the National Taxpayer Advocate is I focus on the problems. But when you look at what the IRS has actually accomplished over the last 2 years in the filing season, the overwhelming amount of those returns, especially if they're electronic, they went through without a hitch. It's those who had a discrepancy with IRS records or those who filed on paper. Those are the ones who are being challenged right now. So we need to educate people, make every effort to file electronically, triple check for errors, and if you can, put on direct deposit information. That'll speed up the information or the refunds for the particular taxpayer, but it's also going to benefit all taxpayers by having fewer issues for tax administration.
Ms. Collins, I think you're right, and I know my time's up. I just, every time I can get in front of a camera, I said we got to file electronically. It is those paper filers who make up the vast majority of the payments that have not been made. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warner. Senator Crapo and I are both going to have some closing remarks that'll probably last like a couple of minutes, but I want to let Senator Crapo go first.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you for holding this hearing, and I just wanted to take a minute to thank each of our witnesses for bringing your expertise here to us to help us find out how we can be most effective at helping the IRS to do its job for the American people. So thank you for what you have done here today to help us understand our task better.
And let me be clear, I agree with exactly what Senator Crapo has said, and I'm just going to add 2 sentences. It seems to me, and you all have been very helpful with your expertise and years of experience, we got a choice. What this committee can do is create a system that works for everybody, or a system that works mostly for wealthy tax cheats and criminal syndicates. And I think we have an opportunity to choose the former. And it is, in my view, and Senator Crapo and I both touched on this in our questions to you, it is at the intersection of outdated technology and unacceptable service. And stopping these collisions is going to take a modern plan that looks to the